'cause you can't, you won't, and you don't stop. Or when you can't, you won't, and you don't stop. Mike D coming down for sure.
So we've seen that we're concentrating on three aspects of consent: duress, undue influence, and unconscionability. Now, these have some quite specific rules that apply, particularly for undue influence and unconscionability. So why don't we get in to have a look at those three aspects of consent. So duress occurs where one party compels the other by expressly or impliedly threatening harm. Okay. If you threaten harm, like if you hold a gun to someone's head, there's clearly a lack of consent and they have engaged in duress, making the contract voidable. So this important point to get, right? If I have person A who threatens person B, person B can avoid the contract, right? They can get out of it if they want. That's what we mean by voidable. B can make it void. A can't. Right? A is still bound. So if they did this and B wants to go through with the contract, A has to go through with it. So the contract is voidable by the person threatened. The threat can be to the personal safety, so you can threaten someone or their loved ones, the safety of goods or property, so it's not just personal, it's property, and also their economic or financial well-being, which is economic duress. This is the one that might cause the most harm, right? This is the one that you might run into most in business. You know, there's a very fine line sometimes between economic duress and hard bargaining. The next one is undue influence. Now, the hallmark of undue influence is that there's a pre-existing relationship where one of the parties influences or dominates the other. Then they use this influence so that the weaker party isn't really consenting. They're not really using independent judgment. So in that case, the contract can be declared void as well. Now, there are two situations. There are certain specified relationships. And we've got some examples here: doctor-patient, lawyer-client, trustee-beneficiary, etc. If you're in that relationship, then the person with influence is presumed to have used undue influence in any contract that they enter into, and they have to show that they didn't. The other one is if you don't have it, it's a non-specified relationship. So just say you have a relationship, but it's not one of those. So this is the rules. Okay, so we've got a presumed relationship or some other relationship. The onus is on the stronger party to show they did not exert influence. So you might take them along to a lawyer so that they can get independent advice. You might use a tender process, right? And so you could show that you didn't use. So it's not necessarily that you always have it, it's presumed, and you need to rebut that presumption. However, if it's another relationship, not one of those recognized relationships, influence is not assumed. The party who is asserting undue influence has to show that they had a controlling influence. That's actually what happened in Johnson and Buttress, the case that we did in the last video. Okay. So, but once you show the other person had influence over you, then the onus is on the stronger party to show that they didn't use it. We go back to rule 1. So you've just got this extra step. You have to show that they had the influence. So I really want to reiterate this rule just in summary. You need a pre-existing relationship for undue influence. Okay, that's the hallmark of undue influence. It's a pre-existing relationship where one has influence over the other. If that's a specified relationship, it's presumed you had it, and you have to rebut that you didn't use it in the contract. If it's not a specified relationship, the weaker party has to show that the stronger party had undue influence. They can show that through a pattern of activity, etc. Once they show that, the stronger party has to show they didn't use it, just like rule 1. But you've got to show that they had that controlling influence first. Okay, undue influence. Last one we've got to deal with for consent is unconscionability. So if someone acts unconscionably, then there's no true consent because they're being taken advantage of. So what are the rules? Okay. So one of the parties has to have a special weakness or disadvantage. Okay. That has been interpreted very broadly. Sickness, illiteracy, lack of education, even being in love. I think that's doubt and doubt. You can ask me about that if you want, but I wouldn't go relying on it. But there is some authority for it. So if one of the parties has a special weakness, the other party knows or should know. Right? Now, the courts use these words like the or should know because people lie. Right? And they say, oh, no, I didn't know that they were elderly Italian immigrants. Well, you should know. Look at them, right? From the Amadeo case. Look at them, listen to them speak. A reasonable person would know. The other party knows or should know about the special weakness or disadvantage, and the other party takes unfair advantage of that special weakness or disadvantage. If you meet those three, notice they're ands. You need all three. One of the parties has a special weakness. The other party knows or should know, and it's taken advantage of. So sometimes people can get confused. Like duress is pretty clear, but they get confused between undue influence and unconscionability, right? Because they can look very similar. Because if someone is relying on another person, they probably have a disadvantage as well. So how do you determine which one it is? Is there a pre-existing relationship? If so, it's more likely undue influence. If this is the first time they're met or there's no really ongoing relationship, unconscionability, right? Is there a special weakness or disadvantage it's taken care of? Unconscionability. Right? Is it someone exerting control and taking care? Probably undue influence. Okay, so there's some hallmarks as to how you can differentiate those two, which can look very similar. The effect of which one you use is the same. The contract becomes voidable for lack of consent by the weaker party. Now, just to round off this section, we want to make you aware of some other areas. One of the other areas where a contract can be voided is if the parties lack consent. Okay, lack capacity. That means they can't fully understand what they're doing. One of the key cases is people under 18. Now, common law allows people under 18 to be bound for certain limited things, things that they might need to live because they might be living on their own at 17, right? And beneficial contract for services, apprenticeships, right? Apprenticeships were very, very big historically. So minors can be held liable and must follow through on the contract for things like apprenticeships. Note, you'd need to check statute, which overrules common law in some areas. If someone's intellectually impaired or intoxicated, then they need to show that they didn't know what they were doing at the time and the other party knew of their condition. It's almost like unconscionability, but I'm not going to call it that. So capacity is an important thing to have. Minors, even though they might not have full adult authority, can be held liable for certain things, necessaries and contracts for service or apprenticeships. So as you can tell, a lot of these rules were formed long ago. Contract law is an area of common law. It's case-based law in Queensland. We don't have a statute around it, so the common law prevails. And the situation in the world is changing a lot with technology, things like AI, online. Online, how do you tell if someone's a minor? How do you tell if they're drunk or intellectually impaired? Very kind of difficult situations that we deal with technology. And as AI increases, they're probably going to increase as well. We know also that those things affect things like agreement, automation means changes how we see like goods on display. So the law will account for these things as we develop. But I'd suggest to you that in general, unless there's a rewrite of the law in statute, we're going to follow the arc of the key concepts that we've seen throughout this module, particularly in those areas of capacity, etc. Okay, so with that out of the way, we've now worked out we've got a contract and whether it's enforceable. So imagine we've formed a simple apparent contract and it's enforceable. We now need to know what's in it, right? And what happens if one of the parties don't follow through on what they've promised to do. And that's in the next module.